Hi, I'm Phoebe Maltz Bovy, and I blog at What Would Phoebe Do and write for various publications, most recently The Atlantic's Education Channel. And I'm thrilled to introduce Autumn Whitefield-Madrano, who blogs at the Beheld, which is syndicated at the New Inquiry. She's written for numerous publications, including Salon and Marie Claire, and her work has been profiled in the New York Times Style section, which is very cool. She has fascinating, original takes on everything from eating disorders to whether sensitive skin is actually a thing. And her beauty blogosphere roundups make it clear how many different topics fall under the header of beauty, and it's all really fascinating. So unfortunately for her blog readers, she's very busy writing a book, and I would like her to tell us a bit about it. Hi, Autumn.
Hi, Phoebe. Nice to talk with you. Thanks for having me on here. Yeah, right now I'm spending in fact, almost all of my writing energy on a book about kind of the sociology of beauty, sort of a survey of where American women are at right now with beauty. There hasn't been a quote unquote big idea book about beauty for 20 years. I mean, Naomi Wolf's The Beauty Myth was the last kind of overarching book that came out. So I'm not trying to, do the beauty myth part two, but I'm kind of looking at how things have changed and how they haven't changed. And so that'll be published in spring of 2015 by Simon & Schuster.
Exciting. So just, I know you're still working on it, but what has changed just briefly since the beauty myth? What's the big change in the past 20 years?
I think that the big change is that we know that there's such a thing as the beauty myth. In my research, it's been fascinating how many women, even if they haven't read the beauty myth, will refer to it either by name or by the ideas in the book, or in Naomi Wolf's book. It's almost like the idea, we all know this kind of, one of her theses in the book was that, women are under this immense pressure to look a certain way all the time. There's really no escaping it. And women knew that intuitively before, but they didn't have the language to talk about it. And now I find that they have the language, and that in and of itself has sort of shifted our expectations of how we talk about beauty. Mostly in a positive way, but it also means that it's hard to say that you like how you look unless you've kind of overcome the beauty myth, which is interesting.
Oh, yeah. Well, I can't wait to read it. Great. So I thought that perhaps, since we've both written about this topic, and I think both have a lot to say on it, we might start with discussing what you call the Frenchwoman beauty myth. So that's a particular facet of beauty myth. So I find that it seems so cliched, right? French women being beautiful. And yet all kinds of fairly cutting edge publications seem devoted to reminding us of this all the time. And I was wondering why you think that is. Why do we still hear so much about how French women are beautiful?
I feel like, it's kind of this holdover from the 50s, a kind of, there was this idea because of French cinema in the 60s that came out, that there was this sort of casual, carefree style and glamour that came out of France. And whether or not that was ever truly the case, obviously it's been a, style, fashion epicenter for decades. But I think that we still cling to that 50, 60 years later. We still think of this idea of, oh, they're so sophisticated. They just magically wake up in their berets and their striped shirts and they go, drink their wine. And then I think that the more Americans actually started to travel and saw that some of that was actually true. You go to the streets of Paris and the people there do look different than they do in Kansas City. I think that there's just this sort of international intrigue. I think a writer for Jezebel called it our national girl crush on France. And I think that that's absolutely true, particularly for women. I think men have a little bit of that, but it's almost like to be a French man is almost considered too effeminate for, the big burly American men. So,
right. Well, yeah, but the stereotype is it's very gendered, who wants to be what. What I find so fascinating with I think it fits into a couple of different things. I think the French woman beauty myth, as you put it, fits into just a general kind of fantasy people have about France, like what do French children eat? you know, how do French people behave, all kinds of things like that. But also, there's just a sort of this sense that being French is something that you have to be born with, and nobody could ever really achieve it. And it's always this thing just out of reach. And this is something, so I just did my PhD in French, and it's almost like getting a PhD in trying to seem French in certain respects. It's like you get these listserv emails for part-time work that'll be like, go work in a bakery, but you have to be a native French speaker, you know, and I could never apply. But yeah, I just think there's this idea with Frenchness that's not necessarily completely sort of racist, although it can be, that you just, that there's a French person, and then there are the non-French people who could never quite be it. So I wondered what you thought of sort of the accessibility of Frenchness.
Well, I think that that's like on a very literal level, as far as the, you know, the idea of the Frenchwoman beauty myth. They're only talking about a certain strain of French people. They're not talking about French Moroccans. They're not talking about, you know, French anyone other than the classic, you know, Catherine Deneuve style beauty. So that's, you know, that's sort of provocative in and of itself. But I think what you said about sort of like there was this fetishization about Frenchness. That's interesting that, you know, you apply to be a bread baker, but you have to be authentically French. You have to really be French. And I think that that goes into the idea, I mean, one of the biggest French women beauty myths is the idea of perpetual carefree thinness, which is very much fetishized in this country and in other countries. But I think that because we do have this sort of fetishized idea of both of those things, it fuses together to create this sort of like combustible myth in a way.
That the French woman who can eat the French paradox, the whole, all of that.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, looking at the statistics about like BMI, body mass index throughout the world, is that I think it's only like slightly under 20% of countries where men have a higher BMI than women, because women just naturally have more body fat, so our BMI is generally somewhat higher. And France is one of those 20% countries.
That's really interesting.
And it's one of, and it's one of the few industrialized nations that has that as well. So it's just fascinating to see that, you know, there people in France looking at the numbers are adhering to the idea of like this effortless thinness. But you've spent considerable time in France. Is that correct?
But pretty much just in Paris. And I think what comes up a lot when people, and this can be discussions of food, but also of beauty, when people talk of, you know, read these long, or at least I like to read these long comment threads in the Times where people will be talking about the superiority of France. For some reason, this is always a big thing. It'll be somebody who went from wherever they happen to live in the U.S. to Paris, to the center of Paris for a week, which, you know, why not? Why would they have randomly lived for 3 years in a rural part of France? But what they're looking at, they would have found if they had gone, you know, to the West Village for a week from rural France. You know, it's pretty much an urban-rural distinction, a little bit European-American, but it's not... What the part of Paris they're seeing is not France, necessarily, you know? And also, I think there are just a lot of myths, sort of sub-myths about this, where a French woman who, I find this fascinating sometimes on Into the Gloss, once they had some woman who was wearing a tracksuit with a lot of gold necklaces and very dyed blonde hair, and she was French beauty, French chic, because she happened to be French, you know, and that was about that, and she looked cool, you know, it was neat, but it wasn't, I feel like because there's just this belief, this sort of transcends reality of that French women, for example, don't get plastic surgery or something like that. It doesn't seem to matter if they actually do. It's just these things get repeated and sort of people just accept them as truth.
Well, it's interesting when you look at some of the sub-myths of the French beauty myth, is that some of them are things that I think we as American women, or maybe just women generally, really want. I mean, some of, like, the idea that women over 50 are still considered, you know, sexy and beautiful. Yeah, this idea of like wearing less makeup but paying more attention to people's skin. The idea that you don't have to go to the gym, you just walk everywhere with your, getting your baguette and your daily groceries and all that. And I think that we really sort of aspire to that, especially maybe in the past
It
15
could be.
years when more and more
I
health
just
was
wonder
coming.
though about the skin thing, because I find that fascinating. Actually, Naomi Wolf discusses this a lot in The
Mm-hmm.
Beauty Myth. But this idea that, and this will actually transition us to the next topic as well, but this idea that it's somehow more liberating to care a lot about your skin than to wear makeup, which it can
Mm-hmm.
be very expensive to put a lot of stuff on your skin. It may or may not improve what your skin looks like. It certainly has been known to improve. It doesn't always. But just sort of
Mm-hmm.
that distinction I find very interesting, that there's something, I probably read into the gloss too much, but this idea that there's something very noble about taking really good care of your skin. Um,
Right.
I find that kind of fascinating. And when I was in Paris, I was living in this free dorm room, so it wasn't all that glamorous there. But then I would go out and I would go into the parapharmacy. It's this parapharmacie, whatever. It's this part of like, it's like a Duane Reade, but
Mm-hmm.
only beautiful bottles of moisturizer, and it's captivating. But yeah, I wonder what you think though about the whole sort of skincare versus makeup distinction.
Um, well, it's interesting because I think that the idea there is definitely more of an increase in the idea of like take care of your skin is somehow more noble than slathering on makeup, and I think it's this idea that we can fool ourselves into thinking that our beauty work is actually health
Mm-hmm.
work, that we're taking care of the skin is the largest organ in the body. So if you're taking care of your skin, then you're just taking care of your
Mm-hmm.
body. It's holistic.
Right.
You're doing, skin yoga or something. Whereas, like you said, maybe some skincare products actually do something. A lot of them don't. A lot of it is,
Mm-hmm.
snake oil. But I think that we want to connect it to this idea of health and you see that a lot, I think, also tying in with the idea of bodies and thinness. Oh, I'm doing it for my
Right.
health.
Oh,
I work
absolutely.
out for my
There's
health.
so much to be said about that. Yes. It's
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
all a little bit blurry, those two. When is something health and when is it weight or beauty? Well, so
Mm-hmm.
this actually will allow us to transition to our second topic, which is
Mm-hmm.
natural beauty. So that encompasses a bunch of things that I hope we can talk about, including just the idea of effortlessness and also the idea of being naturally thin, and how there can be books telling you how to be naturally thin, which I find endlessly
Mm-hmm.
bizarre. But anyway, so there have been all
Yep.
these campaigns urging women to embrace natural beauty, and teenage girls also. So that seems to mean no makeup or no airbrushing, or sometimes it means that you can use tons of makeup, but it all has to be natural makeup from the Whole Foods aisle or something like that. So I was wondering both what you think natural beauty means and whether you think it's liberating or something else.
The way I understand the term natural beauty is this sort of utopian place in which every woman is beautiful and you need to just bring out the inner beauty. If you're beautiful inside, it'll show on the outside. And these ideas that aren't necessarily true. I mean, I'm not saying that people's inner beauty doesn't make
Right.
them more outwardly beautiful, but that's
Right.
a different topic. But when we talk about natural beauty, we're talking about that, the idea that this inner glow will translate to an outer beauty. And also, yes, the idea of effortlessness, the idea that you can just wake up and kind of splash your face with some water and, put your hair in a ponytail and ta-da, you look amazing. And that's why so much makeup is meant to look
Right.
invisible. I mean, especially now you have all these BB creams that are basically, I mean, they're supposed to, the idea is that they kind of change color a little bit with your
Hmm.
skin so that it looks like you're not wearing anything. And I think, there's a positive idea in there, but there's also sort of a fallacy in there as well, because if you have to wear you see these beauty tutorials on how to get the natural look,
Right.
there's 15 steps
Right.
and 17 products.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wonder also about with natural beauty. It seems like it isn't really, though, about that any woman would be beautiful with the water splashed on her face and the ponytail. It's more, it seems to be, again, it's this almost moral idea that the women who are beautiful without any sort of intervention are the only ones who should somehow count, whether it's some sort of creepy thing where men want their offspring to look like those women, or who knows what's at the root of it. But it's this notion that women who aren't naturally beautiful are somehow stealing the thunder of the ones who are, or don't, I feel like there can be something a little, and this is something that women can control how we look more, it's more socially acceptable than for men. And this idea that women are somehow cheating nature or something, I think enters into it.
Yeah, there's this idea that if you wear makeup and it's obvious that you're wearing makeup, that you're somehow, you're cheating the system. You're somehow, that you're involved, it's like a sleight of hand, it's trickery, instead of something that, 70% of American women wear every day. And something that, like, it's also really easy to slam the idea of women who, go all out, who get the plastic surgery, especially breast implants, and wear the, thick, heavy makeup and the big hair. I think that we kind of like to point fingers and laugh at that. It's, oh, that's so sad, that's pathetic, it's trashy. Definitely class plays into this whole idea.
Absolutely. And I think that with natural, the whole idea really is this, to a certain extent, a construct, and that often I find that it's used to basically say what I do is natural, low maintenance, sensible, but whatever would be a step beyond that is too much.
Absolutely. There's always, like, everyone's idea of natural beauty is going to be different. Exactly. One step beyond what I do. Oh, that's not natural. That's pushing.
Right. I think this is particularly, I find, and this is completely subjective and just has to do with what I notice, I guess, but with hair, what constitutes natural is very, very subjective. And as somebody whose hair would, if it were in a more, well, the question is, what is natural, right? So is it natural if you shampoo your hair every day, or if you flat iron it once a week? You know what I mean? I think that there are all these things where what we consider natural is very sort of ethnicity specific. And I could talk about hair for another probably at least an hour, but I won't. But yeah, I think that I just, that natural is definitely a construct. But also, before I forget, so naturally thin, I wrote a blog post about that a few years ago, and the only angry, or really the only comments I still get on old posts are on this one. And I was saying that I don't approve of the expression naturally thin, which I think a lot of people may have just read that title and thought that I hate them for being thin without particularly trying. And the thing is, I myself am fairly small and don't really try, but that wasn't really the point. My point is that there really isn't such a thing as being, I think, naturally anything, given how much women think about, size, and how much everybody is supposed to think about health and where our food comes from and all of that. And also the women who are most often sort of discussed as being naturally thin would be models. And yes, they are naturally, no doubt, quite slim, but that doesn't mean they're not also unnaturally thin on top of that. So they might be, whatever size if they ate whatever they felt like, but then they're just a bit smaller by whatever it is they do. So yeah, I was wondering what you think about the concept of naturally thin, and yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I hadn't really considered it in that light before. I think what comes to mind when I think of this whole idea of naturally thin is that we don't really know what natural is, like you said, because women have been conditioned to think so much about every aspect of their bodies. I think the thing that really bothers me about this idea of naturally thin is that there's no opposite. There's not, oh, I'm naturally heavy. I mean, you can say that, and there are people plenty of people who are naturally heavy, but that's never going to be a term of a compliment. That's never going to be, I think people were trying to get there with the term thick. Oh, Beyonce, she's thick. but it just doesn't have the same
Right.
connotation. But I also think that it's this static idea of like, you know, you emerge from the womb a slender child, you stay a slender teenager, slender woman, and that's just not how our bodies
Right.
work. And I think that that in and of itself is this denial of anything
Mm-hmm.
natural. You know, you could say that, you know, you could look at someone like me who's medium frame, my naturally slim, like, well, maybe, but I also
Right.
do, you know, kind of keep an eye on my calories and that sort of thing. That's not a natural
Right.
act, you know. And then you're talking about, you know, the paleo diet and all that, but that's another thing.
Well,
So yeah, it just doesn't take it doesn't take the way human bodies actually work into account.
right. Yeah.
And then of course there's all the criticism about the idea of, I mean, kind of going back to this idea of health as disguising beauty work
Mm-hmm.
as health work. So that definitely plays into
I think it is really, it is this notion that I think with naturally beautiful, also naturally thin, that it's this sort of quest to not seem vain. And that's also where this very wrong notion that eating disorders are some kind of extreme form of vanity, you know, that sort of
Mm-hmm.
nonsense you hear, that comes from the same idea that basically that anything going on to do with women and looks is vanity, which I think doesn't really quite get at the many different things that are going on, both mental health issues that are completely separate, and you've written a ton about this that's really interesting, but also just the sort of run-of-the-mill weight concerns that rather than being against that women have to feel this way or feel they have to feel this way, that the people who are at fault are women themselves for somehow being vain. And I think that that's sort of what connects these two different natural myths, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
You know, I remember you wrote a post about the idea of natural beauty products that I wanted to touch on, because I had never thought about natural beauty products in this way before. You know, there's one of the fastest growing segments in the beauty industry is organic makeup, vegan makeup. You know, anti-animal cruelty makeup. It's been around for a while. All natural, environmentally friendly, which, you know, yay and good and all that. But I'm a little wary of some of that. I guess the first thing is I don't think the way to save the planet is through consumerism.
Yeah.
But I really liked your point that you were writing about connecting that to this idea of natural beauty. And I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I think that I'm not sure if I can quite connect the two, but what I think with the products particularly is that it's this idea that if you pay more, you're somehow doing something better for your health, for the environment, that it's this great ethical achievement. And right, it is that thing where consumerism and ethics get kind of wrapped up together, and that you can feel kind of good about yourself for having spent, you know, $30 on a really, really high quality mascara, whereas, you know, and what does that say about the person who can only afford, you know, the $6 mascara? They obviously don't really care.
Yeah,
I think that in terms of how that connects to, I think it kind of gives people a pass that basically you can put a lot of stuff on your face and and it is fun to go buy new beauty products, and, you know, you can do that and somehow feel like you're doing something noble at the same time, and that it's different from going to CVS and getting a bunch of colorful things. I don't know. I don't even know how to take really good care of my skin, but maybe I should learn. Maybe now that I'm 30, the time is supposed to have come. But who knows?
Well, you know, French women begin when they're 15, so it's just too late.
Oh, well, you know, I'll never be French. That's the one thing I know in this world. You have had things to say, I believe, about selfies. So we're now on our third topic, selfies, and also social media self-representation in general. And this is a sort of cyber world. Oh God, I'm going to sound very sort of 1997 now, but I am completely clueless about selfies. When I was last sort of in the loop on this, it was about when there was Friendster, and it was very, very stigmatized for your picture to be one you took of yourself, especially if it was in the bathroom. It was this thing where that meant that you
Mm-hmm.
didn't have any friends and you had to take the picture of yourself in your bathroom, and oh, isn't this a little creepy if it's a man doing it? It was this whole very stigmatized thing. But then it seems
Mm-hmm.
like just as sort of online dating isn't stigmatized so much anymore, and just generally being online isn't so stigmatized anymore. I guess the selfie seems to have come with it as now it's cool. So
Mm-hmm.
tell me about selfies.
Well, I think that the lack of stigma that you point out is evident in the fact that we have the term
Mm-hmm.
selfie. I mean, the first time I heard it, I was like, I didn't know what it referred to. And then when I realized, I was like, really? This can't catch on.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's ridiculous. And sure enough, it was the word of the year from something or other. The idea about words is that we don't name them until, like, we only come up with names when there's a reason to, when there's a reason to label a phenomenon or when we want to create a phenomenon. And I think that this is actually an example of it sort of organically becoming a phenomenon because of the availability of digital media
Mm-hmm.
and like everyone can document their own lives. There's this kind of debate going on about selfies right now. Again, Jezebel wrote this piece kind of condemning the idea of selfies as being narcissistic and vain, which is sort of off-brand for Jezebel in a way, in that they're very kind of like reframing things that have often been called women's
Mm-hmm.
vanity and kind of looking at them more
That's
critically
true, yeah.
with a sort of more feminist lens. So it was interesting that Jezebel took this sort of contrarian voice. Because I think that there had been a lot of essays prior to that from young women, like women under 25, writing about how this is a way of documenting their lives. This is a way that they can frame themselves. I mean, literally framing themselves. This is, a way of going from, just taking pictures of other things to kind of documenting one's own existence and the kind of flow and multitude of selves that we do in social media, in general. We can change our Facebook profiles as often as we want. So it's interesting that we're seeing this debate happen now. I mean, I guess this is, of course, it would happen now because that's when everyone is taking these, these selfies to begin with. But I think I'm glad that you brought up the whole idea of the bathroom selfie because when you look at selfies, a lot of them are, in a variety of places, including, after Nelson Mandela's funeral,
the Obama selfie. Yes.
The Obama selfie, yes, the funeral, the memorial service selfie, which, some people are like, you're at a memorial service and you're taking a selfie. But so you have a lot of selfies that are kind of about a person in a place specifically. But then there's also this, like, you see a lot of selfies and they're still taking place in the bathroom mirror, kind of hold it, so you see the phone in the shot. And I find that interesting that is still, it's more than acceptable. It's kind of like a style of selfie that's out there. And I think that what you're really saying with that is you're showing the world what you see in the mirror
that's so interesting.
every day.
I think you're right. Yeah. Yeah, it's the face you make is like your mirror face. Yeah. Yeah.
And here we are, we're really eager to condemn too much mirror gazing as vanity, but then here you are documenting that very vanity, which, is that an indulgence? Is that kind of a blind indulgence in vanity? Or is it, a comment on it and a play on this idea of everyone's doing it, but I'm putting this out there? And I don't really have any grand conclusions about if selfies are, universally positive or negative. I don't think it's ever that simple. But I think there's just a lot of interesting questions going on right now about the connection between selfies and identity.
Right.
Really.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think
ourselves.
Some of this, I've read parts of this discussion online, and it seems like there's a sense that maybe the selfie is you taking control of your own online identity, because I feel like there's a lot of concern that other people will, in this particular context, be putting a photo of you online that you don't like, whether it's unflattering or you appear to be intoxicated, or, especially for people who are, children or under 21. And, there are a lot of concerns about what other people would put online about you. So then the selfie is kind of, this is the picture I have chosen because, my extended arm is in it, or something, you can see that I wanted this there. So that does kind of bring up just the more general idea of how people present themselves on social media. And I was wondering if you wanted to sort of connect the selfie with that. And And also there was this article just now in the Times, I think, about the neurosis that Instagram seems to inspire, and just the general idea of sort of presenting yourself online in a way that will sort of seem, the humble brag and all of that. Like, where does the selfie fit in with that?
I haven't read that article, but that absolutely makes sense. Like any sort of hyper documentation, which basically anything like that is, Instagram or Twitter, anything where you really are using it to document what is going on, either just in your head or actually in your, life in a chronology. There is this, it goes to the idea of self-indulgence. What was the argument of the Times?
Oh, sorry. It was just basically that people see pictures on Instagram, although this occurs just on Facebook or Flickr or other things as well, where you see, if you have friends who seem to spend their entire lives having really, really glamorous dinner parties in really nice places, or they're always on vacation at the beach and they just, have put a lot of pictures of it, and you'll be sitting, at a desk somewhere, and this will not please you, I guess. I wonder just with the selfie how much you even could do though like that. I guess that it really would depend what the background is. I think if it's in your bathroom, unless it's a really nice bathroom for some reason, and those do exist, again, into the gloss, they're always showing them.
Yeah, they do.
But if I were to take a picture of myself in my own bathroom mirror, I don't think anybody would be so excited.
Wildly impressed,
it's New Jersey. But so I think maybe, do you have any more thoughts on the selfie?
Well, it kind of ties in with the idea of, self-presentation on social media as a whole, is that I was reading this study the other day that was really interesting. And it was saying that one of the biggest things that people do online that gives a negative impression is show that there's a gap between their own self-perception and the perception other people have of them. And so I think that you see that happen a lot with selfies. Like I'm sure we all have that friend in our Facebook feed, if you're on Facebook, who always posts selfies, and she always looks amazing, but like amazing in a way she doesn't ever look in
I don't think
life.
I do. That's interesting. I think I've seen that spirit, like the mismatch between a life online and a life offline, but never so much that visually. But that's interesting.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'm thinking of a couple of people. Everyone has those. I have those.
Maybe I do and have hidden them, but yes, it's possible. Yeah,
they're not in your. Yes, exactly, in the algorithm. But it's always interesting to me because the person I'm thinking of in particular, like, is a perfectly lovely looking person, but when she's posting these photographs of herself, it's clearly like this is how she sees herself, this is how she wants to be seen, and it's just so far from my perception of this person, which is I have a positive perception of her, both visually and just as a person, that it almost makes me a little bit sad that, like, okay, well, this is the image that you've chosen. But then I also remember right on the brink between getting access to digital photos myself, like getting my first digital camera, and before it became ubiquitous to share everything online, like, I did take a lot of selfies because I was curious. And I remember looking at some photos where I looked good in a way I don't normally ever look, like my cheekbones were highlighted or whatever. And I was like, wow, this is great. But I would have been way too embarrassed to show someone that photo because I knew that it was like an unrealistically nice looking photograph.
Oh, that's interesting.
But I think that goes, the idea of that gap in self-perception and perception from others goes into play with social media.
Absolutely.
And, all sorts of other things.
What happens when we get to a point where, let's say somebody has 1,000 Facebook friends, 90% of whom they know from some kind of internet thing. It may not even really matter. That could be them. It's a new world.
Exactly.
No one will ever know that offline they are completely different. I don't know. So I think it might be time for topic 4, if that's okay, which is male grooming and the female gaze. So these two are not entirely related, but partly I will try to make the case. But basically, so you had a really interesting post recently about the female gaze, and I think we may have different views on what the female gaze is. So I understand that blogging heads likes a little controversy. So what do you think is the female gaze, and how is it or is it not like the male gaze?
I think that the way that I right now would define the female gaze is sort of a co-opting of the, quote unquote, the male gaze. This idea of women looking at either themselves or at other women in this sort of objectified manner. And I think that what makes the female gaze separate from the male gaze is that at the same time that we look at, if we look, like I wrote the post that you're referring to, I was writing about how against my will, the first thing, whenever I'm walking down the street, my eyes just go to women's thighs. And it's crazy. Like I see myself doing this and I'm like, I don't want to be doing this, but it's just, there it is. I'm just checking out random people's thighs. It's upsetting. But I think what's going on there is I'm not looking at their thighs in just as a sort of separate thing from myself. Instead of just seeing it as an object separate from myself, I'm incorporating it into my own self-image in a way. Because growing up, my thighs weren't the thing I was always paranoid about. And so it's like this simultaneous distance and over-identification with women, which that's kind of how I'm, in a nutshell, how I'm defining the female gaze.
So I thought it was interesting that your female gaze is a gaze at other women by women who are, I would assume, mostly straight women. And that would be different than
Probably.
A woman who is gay or bi and is looking at these thighs, maybe with some jealousy, cellulite comparisons and such, but also, in a more sort of male gaze, like
a craving manner.
Right. So this is straight women looking at other women. Because I guess when I saw female gaze, I first thought, oh, surely this is women gazing at nice-looking men. So I guess I thought that was interesting that I don't know why my mind goes there. I guess that might be where my gaze goes. But anyway, but
you go, girl.
But this always makes me think, though, of this time I was with my now husband in a coffee shop in Soho, and Keanu Reeves walked in and was very striking, and yet I continued to eat the brownie I was eating because it was a particularly good brownie. But he was in a suit. It was Keanu Reeves in a suit. And I was like, well, it's a good brownie. But anyway, I guess what I had wondered, though, with the female gaze is you wrote in that post something about how women are, some study had shown, aroused by seeing women in porn, even women who like men. So I guess I was just think this whole idea of whether female desire is a desire to be found beautiful, or whether women are desiring men in a more sort of straightforward way, but feeling sort of obligated to phrase it as, rather than, oh, that guy is so hot, oh, I hope that guy, and that one specifically because he's so hot, finds me beautiful. So I was wondering about what you think of that.
It's so hard. This is one of those cases where I feel like it's so difficult to, suss out the nature versus nurture thing, because there very much is this idea out there that, oh, boys will be boys. They're going to look and comment at women, but women are somehow above that. They're supposed to be nobler, and we see the inner beauty. Whereas that's not true. Of course, women want men who they are physically and visually attracted to. But I also can't dismiss that entirely as a social concept, because I've gone out with plenty of men who were not traditionally good looking, but I either came to find them beautiful, or it just wasn't what attracted me to them. And I know that there are plenty of women who are also like, oh, I couldn't do that. Like I've got to think he's really hot. But either way, I think that for a lot of women, and to myself included, having this sort of indirect route to arousal, like on a visual level, like that kind of has become the norm, for better or worse. Well, for worse, most likely. But yeah, the study that I was talking about, this idea that when women are watching porn, even if they're straight and they're watching, two women in a pornographic setting, like they're aroused by that. And whereas men won't look at two men, straight men won't look at two men and be aroused by that. And I think it is this idea of projection and identification and embodiment. I don't think it's that we're just like so open-minded and sexual all the time.
No,
so
that
I
makes
think
sense.
probably comes into play for both.
That makes sense as why that would be. I think it could be that my just completely unscientific sense of this is that this has been maybe a little exaggerated, and that there probably are women who, for lack of another way of phrasing it, kind of approach these things mentally the way gay men do, and are really just sort of looking at men, but are sort of socialized to describe it as wanting men to look at them. But the other thing about that was, so I was trying to think what. Yeah.
Well, I feel we were talking about the idea of this, this topic kind of being the idea of the female gaze and male grooming, and I think that there's a definite connection. I think that there is a connection between the two, because I think that I don't know how many times I've had this conversation with men about street harassment, and they're like, well, what? But they're saying nice things. And, if a guy's making a crude comment, that's not nice. But a lot of times the guy is saying, hey, beautiful, oh, you look great today, nice legs. Like things that are ostensibly comments, or compliments, rather. And I think that some men genuinely don't understand that they see that as a positive thing, because it's like, well, they're saying nice things. And, wait, no one ever says nice things about the way that I look. And I think that more and more you're seeing men sort of admitting that they want compliments, that they want to be visually desired.
Well, I think what you were saying, I remembered what I was going to respond to, about dating men who aren't necessarily so attractive. I think that can be liking men for their looks. It's just, I think it's much more socially acceptable for women to sort of, women can even say it's not about looks when it is, and can like male looks in a very sort of subjective way, whereas with men, it's how many Victoria's Secret models can Adam Levine have possibly been. That's sort of the ideal, and that doesn't really exist in quite the same way as it does. I think there's a real disparity there, and that it's possible. It's a separate thing from getting to know somebody and then finding them attractive. Although there, even the question is, could anybody get to know anybody and find them attractive, or is there some kind of cutoff? And but I really want to get into the topic of male grooming. And so, are men grooming in some capacity?
They are indeed grooming.
Fascinating.
They are. When I was talking about, the natural beauty sector of the beauty industry, actually the fastest growing sector of the beauty industry is products aimed at men. And in America, we're mostly seeing, I've noticed definitely in the past year, this explosion of ads on TV about, body sprays and shampoos and body washes aimed specifically for men. They're the exact same as for women, except that they smell like a man instead of being floral or whatever. But that sector is definitely growing. And abroad, like especially South Korea is, I think it's like 20% of South Korean men wear foundation. That's a lot of men walking around. Yeah, it's a lot. And you don't really see that in this country yet. You see maybe, a teenage boy using, something to cover up his acne scars or whatever. But you don't see men wearing, for the most part, you don't see straight men wearing
I don't think you even generally see too many gay men wearing makeup either.
Not really. I think once upon a time there was more of that, like in the 80s Boy George thing going on. But that's sort of the past. Like even, quote, guy liner isn't
that never
really
seems to have
anymore.
caught on. Or not recently, at least. But so this is more like foundation, or is it?
In South Korea, so I don't want to say that that's happening here. I don't even know if it will happen here, because I think that we have a sort of different construction of masculinity. I also don't know enough about South Korean culture to really comment.
Well, my husband was just there. I'll have to ask him if he came back with foundation, and I don't know.
I'd be very curious to know, what if he noticed anything there.
It's possible. I think what's interesting, though, is just how making an effort is so sort of, it's so asymmetrical. Whether, if a woman makes an effort, she's seen as seeking out or at least being open to male attention. Whereas if a man visibly makes an effort, he's seen as at most maybe wanting male attention, but it's sort of the way men signal interest is almost by looking kind of schlubby, the way they indicate it. So it's sort of, it doesn't necessarily, it can't really cross over, it can't really be that a man wears short shorts and even if his legs are wonderful, women are not going to be drawn to him in the same way. And it's not, it's just, the effort just sends such a different signal.
That's the thing. I feel like we look at male nudity as comical, and we don't look at female nudity as comical unless it's like an old woman and you're doing something cruel for laughs. I mean, like in the terrible base comedy ideas. But you hardly ever see male nudity painted as a sexual.
Right. It's either funny or it's meant
desire
for other men, or it's some sort of internalized homophobic thing that kind of fuses the two, I guess.
Yeah. And I can't help but wonder if this actually ties in with the idea of selfies and self-documentation, because I think that I don't know if you've ever spent any time on Craigslist personals, but out of curiosity,
not.
I did. Yes, well, you're missing out on quite a lot. There are a lot of men out there eager to show pictures of themselves, and not just
I've heard about this,
shots.
though, yeah.
It's a phenomenon. Like I heard about this and I went on. I was like, holy cow! It was like man after man, and not just the idea of a crotch shot or whatever. But I mean, think of all the pictures that we've seen of who was that politician in New Jersey, the shirtless shot in the mirror. I can't remember his name.
Oh, I don't remember.
And of course, Anthony Weiner. Yeah. But like, it's not just pictures of their crotches. It's like full body pictures, the muscle pictures, the selfie.
Yeah, I guess maybe there's a sense that women would respond to that. I don't know. I've never really understood that. I think I had kind of thought it was more that these men just kind of are exhibitionists and aren't even that concerned with the sort of practical results that gets them. But who knows, if it's so many of them, maybe it works for some people. I have no idea.
That's the thing. Or maybe it, I think that there's the fetish of being an exhibitionist, which I'm sure is part of it for a lot of them. But I think that there's also more and more this idea of wanting to be seen and desired. I almost wonder if men are a little bit jealous of the idea that women can be looked at and appreciated aesthetically, because we do place a really high premium on that for women. But that also means we're putting a pretty high premium on that in general. I mean, everyone knows that, Keanu Reeves is a good-looking man. George Clooney.
Yeah, I don't like George Clooney, but yes, I know that people think this.
I do. Yeah, but we still elevate the idea of the good-looking man. So I wonder if, more and more men are kind of wanting that.
I think what they might want, and I think this is something that if I were a man, I would be jealous of, is the ability to control your looks, both how attractive you are to some extent and how sort of available you seem, whether you're the person at the sort of proverbial bar who would get the attention, because women can decide on a given day, am I going to look sexy or not? And it's not totally controllable. And, obviously that doesn't justify any, assumptions people make about what a woman would do that evening. But, you can control more how you look at a particular time. And men, what can a man do to be sexy that evening? Nothing, really. I mean, the only thing with men's looks that's supposed to be sort of universal, although obviously it isn't really, is like with height. And a man can't even go in wearing heels without that being,
right.
And then what else? Men in makeup are going to be seen as possibly not looking for women in the first place, or as kind of silly. And yeah, I think it's a blessing and a curse to not really be able to control these things. On the one hand, it's a shorter morning routine. But, I guess they can go to the gym, but that won't necessarily be obvious in, the clothing you'd wear to go out, unless it's very tight, in which case, again, that would be, in our culture, somewhat discouraged, although there are hipsters, so maybe that's changed.
Well, there's that, and I'm also thinking of the whole Jersey Shore phenomenon.
That's true.
And I don't want to stereotype any group, any socioeconomic or even just like in a subcultural group. But there is, I mean, at my gym, there are these men who work out a lot and they are wearing like the neck chain,
Really?
the necklace chains, you know, they have the gel in the hair. Yeah, it's this very particular subculture that is kind of like what you would see on the Jersey Shore. Obviously, that's an exaggerated version of it. But there is almost this embrace of the sort of preening, you know, this. I remember there are these men who will like flex in the mirror and be looking at themselves, and it just goes against this idea of men looking at themselves in that way. Is like, you know, we don't tend to embrace that, but here there are men doing it right there in the gym. Maybe that's because it's sort of a male leaning space, and there's almost like a comfort level in it. I don't really know, but I think that we're more and more we are seeing this idea that it's okay for men to take pride in that sort of very producty kind of way.
So maybe it is just like the sort of frat bro subculture that has been wrongly conflated with sort of universal male heterosexuality, and that's well, while we're talking though about tight pants, I think we probably have time for one more topic, and I'm desperate to talk about this. Lululemon. So for me, these pants have long been very fraught. I don't own any, and there's like an endless, as ridiculous as to say, backstory to I live near a Lululemon, kind of. I live out in the woods, but sort of when I leave the woods, the first thing is a Lululemon. And since I've moved here, it's sort of been like taunting me, like, look at the nice shiny pants that will make your body look fantastic and all of that. And I was going to buy them as a sort of treat for myself after turning in my dissertation, and then I tried them on, and it was just this sort of like anxiety, and I remember just sort of flashing back to when I was in 5th grade trying to decide whether or not to buy Adidas Sambas, because did I want to be like the girls who wore those, but I liked what they looked like, and it was this whole very, in retrospect, ridiculous thing. And then I thought, I haven't had that about any kind of item since I was like 9 or 10 or something. And here are these pants. And then what I find so fascinating is so many women seem to be equally, if not more, anxious about these pants. And I've just read so many articles by, very serious writers about, the anxiety that Lululemon pants, whether it's the price, the size, the guy being, a libertarian, or the see-throughness. So I understand that you have some thoughts about, and possibly some actual pants from this store. So what is it about Lululemon?
Well, I think that you hit on it there. I mean, the flip side of anxiety is aspiration. And I think that Lululemon has done an amazing job of being they are aspiration. That is what the entire brand is. I mean, you go in there and they very carefully curate their salespeople. I mean, all retail stores kind of pick representatives, very carefully. But I think Lululemon does it in maybe even more so than other stores.
I agree.
That I've seen. You go in there and they're all like these, yoga bunnies, and they all look amazing, and in the pants and the gear and all that, and they're all
even in New Jersey. That's true. Yes.
Yeah, that's the thing. Everyone I've been to, like, it's this very specific kind of culture and ambiance. And then you look at this idea of, actually, this goes back to the idea of conflating health and beauty. Is that like Lululemon is kind of the apex of the two? Like I do have Lululemon. I have a pair of pants and a sports bra, and they perform really, really well. Like, I got them because I liked how they made me look, rather. That now I just really like the fact that they whip beautifully. They never,
bad fabric Lululemon? Is that the issue? Because that was part of the anxiety for me, was that I had been anything that expensive. I sort of like ponder for a really, really long time, and in the time I was pondering, they went from this supposedly high quality item to there were all these controversies.
See-through and pilling, but the pilling is your fault because your thighs are too big, according to the CEO. Yeah, exactly. The pants, I did get them pre those controversies, but it's funny. There have been controversies about Lululemon going back to like 2007. Like, they were claiming that some of their gear had this miraculous seaweed in them that did something or other, and the New York Times tested it, and it was cotton. It was just cotton. So, so then you have to ask, like, how, here I am saying that that their gear performs really well. And I do think that they do, or I wouldn't wear them, or wouldn't keep on wearing them. But then I'm like, maybe that's just because I want them to perform well. I think that they perform well. And so therefore I find them more sweat wicking than other pants. Like, I don't know.
Well,
it's kind of sort of placebo effect with yoga pants.
I don't know. There's something strange with that brand. I mean, I was once asking someone, this was many years, it may have been around 2007. I was asking someone where her bag was from because it was really nice. And it was from Lululemon, but she was very, very evasive about that and was really insistent that it was a gift and it was like this big thing. And this is not somebody who like doesn't have nice looking clothing otherwise. It was just somehow it was like something very like shameful I don't know, it was very odd. And that was sort of how I first learned what Lululemon was, I think. I thought it was like more of a bag store at first. But, yeah.
No, was this Who Was John Galt bag?
No, it was just one of their, like, purses or something, like like a big handbag. It was black. It was really nice. I should have gone and gotten one then, but anyway, I just think it's fascinating because it seems to really just bring together every possible anxiety because it's like they're the women who wear them who are, online at Whole Foods and, it sort of fits some whole lifestyle, like there was this 30 Rock episode where Liz Lemon is sort of a stay-at-home woman and like she's just this life of leisure. Like I sort of associate it with that. Like it's just this whole lifestyle that you're not supposed to want, but maybe you kind of on some level secretly do. I don't know.
And I think that the reason I got the pants was because it was a reward to myself because it had been a year since I'd really started doing heavy strength lifting at the gym and I was so proud of myself. And I told myself I'll buy some really nice exercise gear after a year. And I did. I was wearing, I don't even know what I wore before, but it was a reward to myself because I'm not the prototypical Whole Foods shopper in some ways. And so it's interesting that you and I both was like, this was a reward. Yeah. So it was like almost this idea of rewarding ourselves with that lifestyle, even though neither of us really aspire to that lifestyle.
Right. I think it taps into something even if you don't want it to. I think that's what's so strange with those pants. And I don't know if I'll make it living here without ever buying them because I just pass it not every day, but quite often. And they want me to come in and I'm like, can't do it. But and the Athleta ones are okay. But they're not probably the real whatever. Who knows?
The actual miracle fabric.
I don't think any miracle has happened, but they're better than the Uniqlo ones that were you would not be surprised if triplets were to. It's that type of material and elastic situation. Anyway, so do you have any other thoughts about any of our topics or anything else, perhaps beauty related, that you want to say?
I have one more thing on Lululemon actually, is that the most recent controversy with the CEO saying, if your pants are pulling, it's because you're probably too big to fit into them. Like literally that's what he said. I'm really curious. I'll be like in a year to see if that's actually hurt their bottom line at all.
I like the bottom line.
There was
I find myself saying things. Okay, but yes, go on.
No, that's exactly it. Because I feel like there was there was a shitstorm about this. It was a really big deal. But I also think that most people who were upset were not really the people who were already shopping at Lululemon. That cemented my decision to not buy from them anymore. But I was already kind of like, I don't know, I feel sort of objective, and Ayn Randian in them anyway. So I'm just curious, because in some ways I feel like that kind of codifies it even more as this idea of aspiration.
Right, I think so.
Oh, your body is the right kind of body.
This is their marketing. It's that, lots, that's what I think is so strange about this. So many stores sell things that are expensive. So many stores only go up to whichever size. And even so many are run by people with sort of right libertarian philosophies that you wouldn't expect. That all of this seems to have happened many times. It just seems that here, I think that's going to help them almost. I think that their marketing campaign is this kind of mix of making sure that only a certain type of woman is wearing them and inspiring women. It's sort of these women, I think, I won't speak for you, but I'll say for myself, who are sort of on the periphery of this, inspiring this kind of anxiety where you would then want to buy the pants. You know what I mean? Like, if you're really rich and really thin and really fit and like you work out, 5 hours a day, that's not quite the target. It's more like people who are, who could get into the pants, could put together the money to buy the pants, but it would be like a stretch in both senses, Not trying to be so like graphic with the Lululemon pants, but anyway, something like that.
I was asking for it.
Yeah, I guess it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's we touched on a lot of things that I really care about. So
well, great. Yeah, I'm so glad you could come on.
Yeah, thanks so much for asking me to join you.
I'm so glad you were available. Great. Excellent. Well, thanks so much. Okay.
Thank you.
And
okay.
Goodbye, blogging kids.